Uh, Greetings of the day. We will be now moving on to chapter 17 of the book Economic Management and Emerging Issues in Pakistan Economy. And again, this is one of my favorite chapters as well. And I have authored this chapter in this book by Professor Dr. Aslam, which is Economic Management and Emerging Issues in Pakistan. This book was an award-winning book from HEC. So now I will be discussing, chapter 17, which is about the new development paradigms and public policies, nudging people towards inclusive growth. Basically, when I started to work on this chapter, so these were those days, when Richard Thaler was given the Nobel Prize in behavioral economics for his nudge theory, and it was a topic of a lot of discussion. People started to love reading it, and the ideas given by Richard Thaler was also very, rich in you can say literature, because he actually gave a paradigm shifter. So the topic of this chapter is nudging people towards inclusive growth. Before you listen to this chapter, I want you to go through, our previous chapter 12 and 13, which is also about inclusive growth. And when you need to understand the chapter 12, you need to have understanding of chapter 10 as well, which is about the poverty and income inequalities. So chapter 10, then 12, then 13. These three chapters will build your base towards chapter 17. Um, it is basically part 5 of the book. Now, let me give you a quick overview of this very interesting chapter um, by myself. So, chapter 17 is basically the last chapter of this textbook as well. And it is in some ways the most forward-looking and intellectual, chapters of this book, because it examines, the new development paradigms, the new ideas and framework that are basically reshaping how economists and the policymakers would think about the development, with a particular focus on behavioral economics and the nudge theory, as I discussed before. So this chapter basically reflects, my conviction that these technical tools of economics, however sophisticated in nature, are insufficient here without an understanding of human behavior, the psychology, and the decision making, the sociology, and the environment, or the, you can say, the people around us. So this chapter basically is built on the idea that development policies have ignored how people actually think and decide, and there is a need to design interventions, based on the fiction of the uh, perfectly irrational. Uh, okay, let me say it in this way, that before economics seems to build that human beings are rational, okay, but behavioral economics says that people are not always rational. They make errors. They are. So we need to have a policies. We need to have some interventions designed in a way that does not take people as perfectly rational or fully informed agents, and they will, systematically perform, on how the policies will be designed. So this is, the basis of this chapter. So we need to have nudges to actually, help people towards, the right decision making, and the government should act as a mother acts towards a child, in which, she nudges the child towards the right decision. So the great insight of behavioral economics is not that people are irrational in nature. It is that human rationality is bounded, which means that it is shaped by the cognitive biases, it is shaped by the social context, and some psychological traits that the standard economic models would not capture. So designing policies, with an understanding of these realities can better, produce outcomes at a lower cost. And now open your minds up, and let's do this. Let's have a training experiment. The same policy described as save 200 lives versus 400 people die would generate different responses even though the outcomes are identical, right? For example, there are 600 people, 400 of them died, and because of a medicine, 200 lives were saved. If you portray 200 lives saved, this might not, grab that intention. But if you would say 400 people died of that disease, then the response will be a different. Now, this is a kind of demonstration of framing effects which can motivate, motivate you to basically read this chapter and, understand and, benefit from the magics of behavioral economics, I believe. So, let's understand the human mind and nudge theory before we actually, apply the nudge theory to Pakistan's policy challenges. The theoretical foundations of this chapter basically draws on the work of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler. Richard Thaler is one of my most favorite economists. And Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 framework basically distinguish between fast, intuitive, and emotionally driven thinking, which is, the System 1, and slow, deliberate, and analytical thinking, which is the System 2. So he says that basically it is, the System 1 and System 2 framework, and we need to distinguish between these two. Because it is only then that we are going to understand that how human decisions are made, including including that how we would actually make our decisions. So really sorry for the break. Yes. So basically, we need Thinking Fast and Slow, a book by Daniel K. Kahneman is also about the same context of System 1 and System 2, which actually would help us to understand that how human beings take decisions. Now, these decisions could be, any kind of decision, such as, the ones could be the economically consequential ones, which are made through System 1 and which you can say are more suspected to be based upon predictable biases. So Richard Thaler and Cass Sustain's concept of nudging builds on this foundation basically. So a nudge is a design choice in the choice architecture, the way options are presented that predictably alters behavior without forbidding any options or significantly changing the economic incentives. So nudges basically work with System 1 rather than against it. So classic nudge example basically says that okay, now let me give you an example. Okay, so you may automatically enroll workers in a pension scheme without opt out, so it would dramatically, increase the saving rates compared to the requiring active opt-in, even though both systems offer the same choices. But placing, the automatic enrollment would actually have less people drawing out. So placing healthy food first in cafeterias would also increase, consumption of nutritious meal without restricting the choices. Now, similarly, sending the text reminders that mention what percentage of neighbors have already paid would obviously improve the tax compliance. Now, this is the beauty of nudges that they are often, low cost, they are reversible, and they're respectful of individual autonomy, which means that people can always opt out or make a different choice. This distinguishes nudge policy from paternalistic mandates that restricts basically choices. So the UK behavioralist insight team, which is also called as Nudge Unit, was established in 2010 to apply basically the behavioral insights to UK government policy. And it has generated hundreds of low-cost interventions that have improved, public health, tax compliance, energy conservation, and public service delivery. The model has since been replicated in dozens of countries. So now I want you to apply basically nudge theory to Pakistan's policy challenges, which is, the second part of this chapter. And, it addresses the question that how does nudge theory apply to Pakistan's specific development challenges? And this is the question that makes the chapter original and practically very relevant. So Pakistan faces many policy challenges where behavior changes is central. Tax compliance, most tax evasion in Pakistan is not committed by organized crime. Rather, it is ordinary in nature, and under, declaration by the businessmen and individuals who have, normalized the non-compliance. So, nudge interventions such as, letters that emphasizes social norms that most businessmen in your area pay their taxes, simplified filing, prominent reminders can particularly improve the compliance without increasing the enforcement costs. Now, health behaviors such as vaccination rates and dental care visits, sanitation practices, and dietary choices are all influenced by cognitive biases and social norms that nudge interventions can address. The polio vaccination campaign, where community health workers personally visit households rather than relying on people to come to clinic, is essentially a nudge, which reduces basically the hassle cost of vaccination to near zero. Similarly, when it comes, to macroeconomic savings and investment, Pakistan's saving rate is low partly because of the genuine poverty, but also partly because of the persistent bias, which means the tendency to overweight the immediate consumption relevant to future saving. So financial product design, which automatic saving schemes, goal-based saving accounts, and reminders linked to important life events can help people save more in line with their own state preferences. Similarly, agriculture technology adoption, where farmers often know about productivity improving practices, but yeah, so where basically farmers often know about the productivity improving practices, but do not adopt them due to some risk aversion, a lack of information about the peer adoption, and the cognitive cost of changing established routines, basically, can all be improved with proper designing of nudges. Social proof nudges basically showing are those which are showing, that respective local farmer has adopted a new seed or practice, and this is how, you can also accelerate technological diffusions. Now, I want you to actually reflect back on my so far discussion. And I want you to think on policy problems in Pakistan where a nudge intervention might be effective. And this is all the objective of this today's lecture as well. What biases or hysterics are involved? Think about it. And what choice architecture would change, would actually address them? So design a nudge for a specific Pakistan context. I give you some time, think on it and design it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I hope that you would have designed a nudge for a specific Pakistan context. And I would love to hear from you, from for with your email. So do email me. You can email me always at ariba.aslam@econ.uol.edu.pk and share your insights about what do you think a specific problem in Pakistan can be addressed through some kind of nudge. Um, Now I want you to also have some nudge application across, policy domains. And to do that, let me walk you through the nudge application across, major policy domains, which we have covered in this course. And you can say in this book, agriculture development basically is chapter 1 and chapter 2 of this book. And it was basically the default planting calendars, which was aligned with weather forecast, pre-commitment contracts for technology adoption, social proof communication about neighbor adoption rates, specific and simplified credit application processes with pre-filled form. All of these are some of the nudges that can actually help you, that can actually not help you, but the farmer to have a higher agriculture productivity. Now, chapter 3 and 4 for this book was about the industrial and the SMEs development. So, for those chapters, the nudges could be simplified business registrations with some kind of, progressive compliance requirements. There could be some automatic enrollment in SMEs programs, there could be some default formalization pathways, peer learning networks that reduce the information cost of business improvement are some of the nudges, which can lead towards a higher industrial produce and higher, industrial growth. Okay, but at a micro level, obviously, it's important to understand that most of the nudges work at the micro level. The results are often amplified and they become macro level, but they're done at the micro level. Population and human capital was chapter 5 of this book. And to control basically population, you can have multiple nudges. For example, there could be some commitment devices for family planning. There could be some school enrollment reminders sent to parents. There could be some conditional cash transfer with simplified compliance requirement. There could be some peer norm communication about vaccination and sanitation. If you talk about fiscal and monetary policy, which is chapter 6 and 8, then to achieve more more tax compliances, to achieve more taxation, you can have nudges that are based upon tax filing simplification. There could be some salience of tax collection in public spendings. Yeah. So then there could be some automatic payroll deduction systems. Then there could be some transparent reporting of government's financial performance. All of this are basically some of the nudge applications across the policy domains. Chapter 10 to 13, I would say, which includes the chapters on inclusive growth as well, basically were about the poverty and inclusion. So simplified means in income support programs, application processes, automatic enrollment based upon some poverty scores, the consumption smoothing products for seasonal income violations, financial literacy nudges which were integrated into social transfers are some of the policy nudges that you can, propose. Chapter 14 of this book was about the environment, which, gives you an understanding of the default green options in energy and transport. So energy use feedback that compares basically consumption to neighbors, which is green pledge, or the commitment devices, some social norms, communication about the environment behavior were some of the nudges that you can put for some environmental goals. Now then there was a chapter about debt as well, because debt and dependency issues also very chronic in nature, and you need to have certain kind of nudges to basically overcome it. And for that, to solve the issue of debt, you may have more tax returns, because the more you earn, the more you will be able to return back. So for that, you can have some nudges which are focused towards tax filing simplification, or which includes salience of tax collection. So that can work out. Um, so basically, then comes, chapter 15, which is about the trade and CPAC. And this is chapter 15 to chapter 16. So this basically looks at, the export promotion through simplified, custom procedures, through some default registrations, which can help you out with export agencies for qualifying firms, peer network informing about exports performances. So these are, some of the nudges that you can work out, and you can see then that how, they can be very helpful for you in achieving, macroeconomic objectives. So let me now just conclude this full book, because we have been, going through 1 to 17 chapters of this book. And let me just conclude this whole textbook and the course of issues in Pakistan economy with some, reflections of what a new development paradigm for Pakistan might look like. By integrating the insights of all these 17 chapters, first, the paradigm must be empirically grounded, which means, Pakistan's development challenges are complex in nature and they are context specific, which means, there are simple theoretical prescriptions, whether from some Washington consensus liberalization or, some heterodox models, or, any single framework that will be inadequate. So we need a context specific and an evidence based policy design that draws on theory but is informed by rigorous empirical analysis of what works in Pakistan. Second, the paradigm must be institutionally realistic, which means that Pakistan's institutions, its state, its market, its civil society, and the political system have specific strengths and weaknesses, and we must acknowledge them first. So, policy design must work with these institutions as they are, while seeking to reform them over time. So, it is a long run process. So, you cannot expect government to come for 2 to 3 years or a 5 year with a 5 year plan, and in just magic that things would get okay. That would not happen. Policies that require institutional capacities that do not exist will fail regardless of their technical merits. And third, the paradigm must be politically aware, which means, that the economic policy is made and implemented in political context. So understanding who wins and who loses, from different policies, and designing, the implementation strategies that build the winning coalitions for reform is as important as getting the economics right. Fourth, the paradigm must be human centered. The ultimate purpose of economic policy is human well being, not GDP growth, not fiscal balance, not export competitiveness, but the lived experience of citizens, the lived experiences of Pakistani citizens. Sense capability approach, which says, whether people have the freedom to live lives that they value, provides the better compass for development policy, than aggregate indicators alone. This is what needs to be done. Fifth and the last is that the paradigm must take the long. Pakistan's development challenges are deep and structural in nature. They will not be resolved in any single government tenure. So sustainable development requires, building institutions, investing in human capital, and maintaining policy consistency across political transitions. And none of which is easily achieved in Pakistan's political environment, but all of which are very necessary. So this is a moment for, I believe, personal reflection from the author and the reader and the listener's perspective as well. Because share what has driven your commitment to starting, Pakistan's economy for 4 decades. What gives you hope and what worries you most? So this is what, things that you need to think and then come up and let's discuss. Let's see where we can, have some consensus and what we can really do for Pakistan. Finally, we have now completed the 17 chapters and comprehensive survey of Pakistan's economic management and challenges and emerging issues. I want to close with some thoughts on your responsibility as an economist, as the next generation of economic analyst, researcher, and policymaker. Your technical skills, econometrics, economic theory, development economic frameworks are not necessary, but very necessary. Okay, they are much needed. But remember, all of these things, econometrics, economic theory, these frameworks are necessary, very necessary, but not sufficient. So they are going to give you the analytical tools, but these tools are only useful if directed at the right problem with the right question. The right question for Pakistan's economy are not primarily technical in nature. They are political economy questions. Why have good policies consistently failed to be implemented? Who benefits from institutional failures? Who benefits from institutional failures that, basically perpetuate the poverty and inequality? How can reformers build the political coalition which is needed to overcome the powerful vested interest? How can citizens hold government accountable for the development outcomes? Now, these questions require you to be not just economist, but engaged, critical, and courteous scholars. Now, Pakistan needs economists who are willing to speak truth to power, to say clearly what the evidence show, even when it is politically inconvenient, to challenge narratives that serve elite interests at the expense of poor majority, and to advocate consistently for policies that expand economic opportunities for all Pakistanis. The 1400 years of our intellectual tradition, including a strong injunction, speak justice even if it is against yourself. In the context of development economics, this means being honest about. So this means being honest about difficult trade-offs, transparent about the limitations of your analysis, and intellectually humble about the complexity of these challenges. Because Pakistan's development is not predetermined. It is the product of choices, policy choices, institutional choices, and ultimately political choices which are made by citizens, leaders, and scholars. So you are going to be part of that choice-making process. And I hope that this course has given you knowledge, the analytical skills, and the values to make choices that serve Pakistanis people well. My final words, for completing this 17 chapter book is that, first of all, I thank, all the listeners, to the students for their engagement throughout the course. I encourage them to stay in touch, to continue their research, and to apply their trainings in the service of Pakistan's development. The author's intellectual legacy lives in his students, and that is the most important long-term impact of his work. That is all. See you in next lecture or with some other book.